This is a discussion that happened a while ago, and it's pretty interesting. It's about open ballot versus secret ballot. I did source what needed to be sourced. Question. Have you played Among Us? Because if you're still I did. Among Us, holy fuck! Yeah, I'm familiar with the devilish imposter. I'm sorry. I'm using Among Us as a source, but have you played that game using open voting as well as anonymous voting? Yeah. Which voting style helps the imposter the most? Okay, you also need to interrogate the claim too, because there's a difference in mediums, like voting for a guy in a video game and voting for a guy who might get rid of civil rights. It ain't like an apples and apples to a comparison. I understand that bribery and threats don't exist that much in Among Us. I think this is actually wrong. I think threats do exist in Among Us. The imposter tries to kill you, and sometimes people get scared of getting killed, so they prefer anonymous voting also. But in my defense, vote rigging also isn't in Among Us too. But I think it's very clear sign that open ballot is better than anonymous voting. Like, anecdotes can carry an argument. Yeah, but like, if I read that claim as my viewer, my next question is, do you have any real-life evidence? I read one claim you made where the vote intimidation things like that you could just change your vote later, but then the intimidator could literally see that. Yeah, this is true. This is also one thing that I proposed, that we should get rid of terms and allow people to change their votes, and depending on how the votes are changed, who is the president and who is in power gets also changed. The issue with people and voting in real life is that there's a huge 4-year gap in that time. People aren't voting consecutive times enough to realize that anonymous voting is doo-doo water compared to open ballot because of the lack of information that happens due to secret ballot. The reason anonymous voting is used in real life is to keep the vote safe. You need the data of who voted for who for better decision making. Anonymity is objectively worse because of the lack of information of who voted for who. In the long run, that information starts to really matter. Like, you say open ballot are better, but like, you actually need to prove it. Nothing is objective. Know who the billionaires voted for is a useful information. By saying like reading you did. Explain the phenomenon that happens in Among Us then. Bruh. It's like probably apparent in party posters who are billionaires will to vote for. I know it's a stakeless game, but stakes don't change how anonymity clearly causes inferior decision making due to the lack of public knowledge. And also, billionaires' vote doesn't matter. It's the lobbying and funding of the parties that does if you are talking about this case. Not to mention the amount of human force that you are wasting because of trying to make the votes anonymous. I think open voting is done by stupid people. It's not foolproof. But you're dodging the question. What sites are you talking about? Is the very game of Among Us enough as a site to see that anonymous voting is worse than open ballot? No. One source is not enough. You like sources that won't make people laugh at you. People are gonna laugh about Among Us. I know that, but there are really big issues with trying to find sources of secret ballot and anonymous voting being worse, because everyone just uses anonymous voting. Usually in history, people just change into anonymous voting without actually proving that anonymous voting is better than open ballot themselves. Just because of hysteria. Just plain and simple, one source isn't enough to hold an argument together. There are no factors that creates a huge difference in the situation Among Us from the real world. Aside from vote rigging and extra effort needed to keep things anonymous, which further cements open ballot as the better choice, there are huge factors that makes a difference. There's a completely different medium of interaction. I do admit that it's true, but I also do admit that the sample size and the differences between medium can be mitigated. I really wish there was a game or a simulation that tries to simulate anonymous and open ballot voting with a political setting. But I don't know such games or simulations. Whatever, this doesn't matter. If you're talking about stakes, it doesn't matter. I know in Among Us, since it's a game, people can make suicidal options easier, but I don't think that's enough of a difference. Shouldn't we use open ballot more because of its transparency and knowledge it gives? The stakes being high only mandates that we use the best systems, and open ballot is clearly better than anonymous. Okay, I gotta ask, what's the real-life history of open ballots? Like as we were, what countries practices? The issue of open ballots and why they were changed was because the oligarch was openly buying people's votes. This is not a good reason to stop open ballots. They should have seen this as an economic issue and distributed the wealth more evenly. Okay, doesn't matter what your opinion is, you need to include that, that's how papers are written. But instead of doing that, those fuckers just blamed open ballot and didn't fix their inequality issue and changed it into a worse system. You need to interrogate your own class. I can use history, but my arguments won't change. We have games, simulations that prove that open ballot is better. I mean, at best, your viewer will just come up with the impression that you're super biased. Those people were dumb or corrupted. They didn't change inequality. They just changed into an inferior voting system where it's easier to rig, requires more effort to maintain, and ultimately it's the worst decision making because of the lack of information given to the public. You can call me biased all you want, but I'm simply saying that just because most countries use anonymous voting doesn't make anonymous voting automatically better. In fact, Switzerland, one of the most democratic countries in the world, collects a lot of people's signatures to make certain decisions. Or are you just gonna ignore the imposter gains the mass advantage with anonymous voting in this simulation? This is the proof. Okay, you can at least acknowledge that like the sample size is too small. I just don't understand the spirit of acknowledge open ballot as the better system of voting for everyone in Among Us, but then in real life, everyone uses secret ballot. Also, I'll talk about this. It doesn't make a difference. There's no reason why a larger sample size would suddenly change the outcome. Yes, but because real life got more going on than like finding the imposter. Yes, but ultimately it has a lot of similarities. The imposters are the people who want power for themselves and hurt everyone else, while the crewmates are just regular people. But like, you're extrapolating data way too much. What I mean, Among Us like what, 10 players? If you're talking about real life, then remember that vote rigging and human resource wasting happens with anonymous voting. Vote stealing happens in open ballot, but it's not an inherently bad thing. This is a controversial opinion, but this has to be understood. The voter can win from the exchange or lose from the exchange. Threats happen, but if a mob boss had the power to threaten enough people to matter, then they would have just killed the candidate that is a problem to them. Okay, now you need to like prove that. Right now it's just saying that. Do I have to source basic logic too? So you're pro-lobbying? No, but I also don't think you can really stop bribery unless you put a cap on how much someone owns and tax the rich. Have you ever like made a school report or like a social studies or similar class, like written a paper in a university college? I did, but at the same time, I think none of those papers I wrote were really good. I think the job that I'm doing right now is most important and actually the most important thing I've ever done. If bribery isn't a thing, you can't tax the rich. As I'm trying to best support my arguments, I genuinely want some real life proof that I want to show you guys, but these guys just never really sat and thought part of this thing through, because you're voting so few times, once every 4 years, and none are using open ballot and anonymous voting interchangeably and experimenting. And also the differences between open ballot and anonymous voting is there, but subtle. Everything doesn't go to shit when you use anonymous voting, but you're clearly making way worse decisions than you would have if you were using open ballot, and Among Us proves it. Okay, I gotta ask, what are the limitations of Among Us when you look at the system? And there are limitations to discredit it. The limitations of Among Us is that you can't test with a bigger sample, although there are mods that try. You can't rig the votes, there is no extra effort that comes from anonymous voting, even though it happens in real life. You can't bribe people, you can't threaten people. I mean, you technically can. You can, but it probably won't have effect because of the nature of crewmates versus imposter. Okay, so you can't test much in it. I don't think it's a good representation then. Sure, you can vote openly, but you can't test how bribery or intimidation works. And that's like a big concern. But there are no logic that supports this will be different with a bigger sample. And I already explained that bribery has nuances and it isn't inherently a bad thing. If the oligarch gives way too much money to the voter, then the voter wins. If it's the opposite, the oligarch wins. It doesn't take into account like familial relations, political parties, any real-life politicals for that matter. Also, the turnout for every vote is always 100, because it's a game's rule. And intimidation also matters less when you realize that intimidation on a large scale happens exactly because of inequality and public's lack of military control. If people are getting intimidated to vote in a certain way, the problem isn't open ballot voting. It's inequality and military power being held not in the hands of the people. I think the possibility of rigging and the extra effort being wasted to make things anonymous outweighs the downsides that come with open ballot by a lot. Not to mention that the lack of knowledge on who voted for who causes worse decisions, which is proven by Among Us. You only vote for one thing in that too. Did you consider that a problem? I know it's hard to imagine that all the smartest people in the world are allowing countries to change into worse voting methods as time goes on. But this is the truth. You guys didn't bring a source either. I'm trying to argue the best I can, but you guys are just saying that source. I'm sorry, okay? Like, it's kind of hard to explain or give source to something like, and even then, like, you guys treat everything like a fucking religious fanatic. When the poor guy on the Discord argues for something, it has to be a lie. But when an esteemed scientist says something, it's all true without doubt, and it's a perfectly good source. What happened to logical thinking and the argument standing on its own leg? We literally cannot have online voting, and it's entirely because of anonymous voting, and people thinking that anonymity is somehow the core of democracy, which it isn't at all.